Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're discussing the unique mindset of a Catachan. The differences across the Militarum. Spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k novel Deathworlder by author Victoria Hayward. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, if you're a Warhammer fan of a certain age, you'll most likely, like me, have a soft spot for the Catachans, the Deathworld regiment of the Astra Militarum, who echo everything great about those old school Arnie and Stallone action movies. Muscles bulging everywhere, a Deathworld jungle, a disregard for authority. What's not to love? As a kid, I adored those old school 2nd edition Catachan models. And honestly, I'm really surprised we're still waiting to get that big Catachan update on the range they have. I for one definitely thought the fall of Cadia would mean more attention given to the other famous worlds and regiments out there. However, the Cadians have largely remained the poster boys of the Militarum. I do still really hope we'll get some new updates to the old classic units out there. The Talans, the Valhallans, etc. However, I digress. While we may still be waiting for a new Catachan squad to match those limited edition characters we've received, one arena the Catachans have received a fair bit of attention is within the lore. Fairly regular appearances within Militarum stories and even a few dedicated novels of their own. And that's enabled us to get a glimpse of their way of thinking and dive inside their particular mindset, how it differs to your other typical guardsmen, and the Militarum novel Deathworlder did a particularly good job at this. Here upon the imperial world of Lazuli, the Militarum was struggling to hold back a Tyranid hive fleet. So much so that the world's fate seemed all but certain, and it all led to a Catachan Major Wolf Khan, being given a high-risk assignment to head behind enemy lines, to acquire a rumoured Mechanicus artifact that could perhaps turn the tide of the war. A final, desperate roll of the dice, if you will. The Catachans selected for their unique talents of jungle warfare. And so, selecting her small group of chosen guardsmen for the task, Khan undertook her mission. And it's as they began the trek away from the bastion the guard had been holding, that we got an interesting glimpse into her way of thinking, showing us not only how the Catachans perceive themselves, but also their fellow guard. Khan squinted. About 1,500 feet away in the flare of flood lumens, she could see the glint of a metal bridge. "Looks like trees down there," she said. She noted that the side of the canyon was covered in dark, scrubby undergrowth. "Yes," Haruto frowned. "That wasn't on the intelligence pics. General Kvelta did promise us a jungle." Haruto's frown deepened. "Even on Catachan, it doesn't grow that quickly." "You think it's the Xeno?" Haruto nodded. "They've changed the climate. It's hotter and more humid." Khan pulled out a cheroot. "But did they do it on purpose?" She shrugged. Haruto shook his head. "It has to be for a reason. To make it easier for the spores to grow?" Khan took a long drag on her smoke. "Well, let's see what kind of jungle they've made us." "You couldn't talk to non-Catachans about the enemy like this," Khan thought as they marched on. It was anathema to even think about the aliens' motivations. Now that's an interesting thought by the Major there, and I'm not sure it's one I necessarily agree with. However, I do understand her way of thinking here. in regards to being able to talk this way with fellow Catachans, even those beneath her command. It doesn't surprise me. They have a very matter-of-fact way of life upon the jungle Deathworld. There's no room for nonsense. You say it as it is. Now, that's not saying they don't respect the chain of command, because they absolutely do. Earned respect at least. But it's simply their way of doing things, being open and frank at all times. And that bleeds into them contemplating the enemy's motivations. If you don't understand your enemy on Catachan, the predators watching you at every step, you don't survive. It's that simple. So it encourages you to think, to be one step ahead. And I get the idea of other regiments not thinking that way, at least according to her. However, I'd say it more aligns on the chain of command. The notion that is passed down through the guard to concentrate on what you do, not the enemy. And to be fair, that's a sound logic, considering most recruits aren't from Deathworlds, where you've been fighting to survive your entire life. Most recruits into the guard have no idea what they're in for, what hell they have incoming. So sticking to the rulebook makes sense in that regard. However, the other famous regiment worlds, Cadia, Talon, Valhalla, the veterans out there, I think they absolutely think and discuss the enemy's motivations, if it's relevant. A lot of the time when it comes to the Tyranids though, I think it's pretty straightforward. Sure, maybe only the Catachans would contemplate a Tyranid's motivation, but again, they come from a world where they're very much up against large predators, not your typical Militarum enemy. She shared Haruto's frustration at the lack of intelligence handed down by command, or at least the redaction of almost all of it. She understood the need to keep that sort of thing away from regular citizens, but it seemed fairly futile to do so with a regiment up to their necks in Xenos on a daily basis. But the greater problem was that the non-Catachan regiments didn't understand that when you hunted a predator, you entered into a relationship with it. Whether you wanted it to or not, it would learn about you. To not do the same was to give it the advantage. If you didn't work that out pretty quickly on Catachan, you wouldn't survive long enough to worry about Xeno corruption or anything else. Catachan was a planet of many different predators, each with the single objective of killing you. The Tyranids were the same, and if Haruto was right, the bastards made every world their own. Khan didn't want to hang around long enough to see what that looked like. And there it is, the essence and root of the Major's thinking. If you didn't work that out pretty quickly on Catachan, you wouldn't survive long enough to worry about Xeno corruption or anything else. As we all are, Major Khan has been shaped by her surrounding. Not simply the physical, but the mental aspect too. You learn and are influenced by the world around you, your upbringing. That struggle for survival upon Catachan, that battle against all its myriad amount of threats, it's embedded within the Catachan psyche. That contest to grow from prey to predator. And though the regiments leave the world for battlefields across the stars, it's the mindset honed and developed within the jungles that stays with them. But you do also see a bit of disregard in the Major's attitude to other regiments in a way too, that the non-Catachan regiments seem incapable of learning from the enemy. Now again, To say that only Catachans can learn from the foes they fight is absurd. Of course, everyone learns from experiences. However, I think if I was to interpret the Major's thoughts here, it's that Catachans come in already with this attitude built in. Again, because they have been forced to think that way to survive. They are immediately the most adaptable unit stepping out of the ship as soon as they arrive. That's an experience other regiments have to learn, and that can only come upon the battlefield, against the enemy. A battlefield only few veterans get to come out the other side of, especially against the Tyranids. However, that's particular to the Xenos, you could argue. Because if you wanted to argue a Catachan comes better prepared to face a Chaos Force, for example, well, you're going to struggle winning that over Akkadian. A world that, rather than fighting against a jungle and its predators for existence, they were fighting off the traitors of the ruinous powers, eternally, where they learnt to shoot as soon as they were able. And it's these differences that really make up the greatness of the Guard. It's not a single world fighting off the enemy, not a single experience, but the unified experiences of the Imperium. Sure, the Catachans may feel they are the best suited for war within the Militarum, and for certain situations they may well be, but for every world they would excel, there's another battlefield waiting for the Akkadians, or the selfless attrition of the Death Corps of Krieg. The Militarum is the hammer of the Emperor, and untold millions of lives being thrown at the enemy every moment across the galaxy. It's in truth the sacrifice that keeps the Imperium alive, far more than the chapters of the Astartes. But for the key commanders within, those that have learnt and experienced the campaign, the tactics needed, the thought process, there lies the key worlds and regiments suitable for each given campaign. The few standout regiments within a force that could prove pivotal to turning the tide of battle. If one commander knows when and where to use them. And far from being one regiment, one world that stands above any other, for me it's the sheer scope of that experience that is the most beneficial of all. Knowing where each task force is best suited, where that unit of Catachans can make an impact, and where not. But of course, if you were to ask a Catachan, I'm sure they'd tell you they're the best on any world, at any time. And hey, are you going to argue with them? But as always everyone, what do you think? Is the Major right with her thoughts regarding other regiments? That it's only the Catachans that are happy to think like the enemy? Is the rest of the Guard stifled in their line of thinking? And if so, does that give Catachan an edge over every other unit out there? Or like me, do you feel the Major is a little influenced by her own nature? Can you see where the Catachans are more suited, and where the Akkadians would be, for example? Is it the sheer breadth of experience across the Guard that is the true advantage, rather than one specific world? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.